Beleza? Bem, pessoal, eu queria dar as boas-vindas para vocês. Hoje eu vou fazer uma abertura bem rápida, como vocês já participaram de alguns eventos e a gente tem pessoas novas chegando no evento hoje, né? Esse é mais um dos nossos eventos aqui do Reactor. Queria dar, como eu falei para vocês, as boas-vindas. Eu espero que vocês estejam bem e hoje a gente vai falar um pouco sobre como criar impacto, né, e presença no mundo virtual. Só passando algumas orientações para vocês bem rápidas, esse conteúdo em si está sendo gravado, tá, pessoal? E a gente vai disponibilizar esse conteúdo no nosso canal do YouTube. Se vocês tiverem perguntas, a qualquer momento, deixem aí no chat. O Benjamin ele faz algumas interações com vocês ao longo da transmissão também. Então, sintam-se à vontade para comentar, falar, enfim, seja em português ou inglês. Eu estou aqui para ajudar vocês nisso também. O evento em si ele tem legendas, então da mesma forma que vocês estão vendo legendas em inglês na parte inferior da tela, a gente também vai ter legendas em português para vocês acompanharem. E eu só peço um pouco de cuidado quando vocês forem fazer alguns comentários para não compartilhar nenhum dado ou informação pessoal, tá? A gente está gravando esse evento ao vivo, então a gente pede um pouco a ajuda de vocês nisso, beleza? Então, hoje a gente vai falar sobre como criar impacto, né, e presença no mundo virtual. Como vocês devem saber, o momento que a gente está passando mudou bastante, né, o nosso relacionamento com o ambiente de trabalho, e hoje a gente consegue trabalhar na forma virtual, né, em ambientes remotos. Então, essa sessão, a ideia dela é de explorar algumas dessas mudanças que a gente teve nos últimos meses e ajudar vocês a utilizarem melhor o espaço virtual a favor de vocês e ajudarem vocês nesse sentido. Então, a facilitação quem vai fazer é o Benjamin Flower. Ele já trabalhou, tem mais de 25 anos de experiência como gerente, diretor e consultor no mercado de tecnologia. Tem muitas experiências com gestão de clientes, lideranças e tem uma grande capacidade, né, de motivar e a inspirar indivíduos e organizações. Eu acho que eu vou passar a palavra para ele agora. E Benjamin, let's go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Let me just share my PowerPoint and have you confirm that you can see that and hear me clearly. Is that correct?
Perfect. Yes.
All right, great. So as Keo mentioned, the topic today is, if you've had an opportunity to attend some of the previous sessions, today's topic, from the way that I kind of see these, they kind of build on each other, and today's topic is very relevant because we're talking a lot today about this kind of new world that we've been living in for coming up on a 1-year anniversary about right now. And you know, if you have attended some of the last sessions I've done, which have been focusing on think like a leader, talk like a leader, building your personal brand, executive presence, what's really interesting to me today about what we're going to be talking about is how some of these historical and previous topics have changed a bit now that we're working so much more remotely and virtually than we have in the past. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the conversation today, and I'm going to start by just reflecting for just a minute or two on kind of how we got here. And, you know, I don't know that it's very common knowledge, but for quite some time now, even for a few decades, there has been an effort by even major corporations to actually work and establish and kind of create this virtual work environment. And one of the most well-known companies that did this was IBM. And if you go back to the 1990s, IBM had launched this huge effort to build a remote workplace for their employees. And I'm curious, actually, I'm going to have to take a quick step back because one thing that I forgot to mention that I always mention at the beginning of each of these sessions is that I really encourage you to be interactive, and I'm going to kind of ask you at least a couple times to use your chat window. I know there's not a ton of us in the meeting today, but still, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and participate using your chat window. And I'll get to a specific question I'm going to ask where I'm going to ask for your feedback in the chat window in just a minute. But kind of jumping back to my point here about IBM and how historically back in the 90s, they launched this huge effort to have their employees start working from home. Question I'm going to ask you right now, the result of that, by the way, it didn't work very well. They ran that effort for about 3 years, and then they kind of gave up on it. and it really just did not work very well at all. I'm curious if any of you would venture a guess as to why that big effort by IBM failed in the 1990s when they tried to build this environment for their employees to work from home. Any guesses or feedback as to why you think that effort would have failed? If this isn't a specific question that I'm going to ask you to answer here in a minute, so if you're not sure how you want to chime in on that, that's fine. I'm going to tell you just really quick, the real reason that failed was because they launched that whole effort with almost an exclusive focus on saving money by being able to not have to pay for all these real estate holdings and all these buildings that their employees would typically come into work. And initially, when they launched the effort, they were very successful in that regards. They saved almost $10 billion in the first couple of years because they had all these divestments of their real estate holdings. They took all that money and they funneled it into stock buybacks. But the real reason it failed wasn't just because they were only focusing on the monetary gains, but they didn't give their employees any sort of foundation or training and support on how to effectively work in this new environment. And over the course of a few years, they had all sorts of horrible experiences where, customer interactions were nowhere near the level of quality and polish that they had before. Employees and managers didn't know how to communicate. And what you'll see here as we kind of transition into the rest of the conversation today, so much of being effective and productive in a virtual workplace has to do with being able to effectively communicate. So it's just interesting, there's been, like I mentioned, IBM is only one of a number of companies that over the years have really tried to launch this remote virtual workplace. But of course, what's interesting is that if you go back about 1 year ago, basically everybody got pushed into this new environment. And it was just really almost overnight, we found ourselves working and living in this new virtual world that we hadn't lived in before, and certainly didn't have, at least initially, a lot of those same training or support mechanisms that I had just referred to a minute ago. So I'm assuming that for those of you that are attending the session today, that you have your own personal experience with regards to working in the office versus working virtually or remotely. And I'm sorry, I'm just pausing for a moment to look at the chat window. I do encourage you to use the chat window to not just respond to my questions, but also to ask your own questions. So I'm trying to keep an eye on that as well. Let me kind of move forward here and say, now that we're all living in this new virtual world, one of the things that's really interesting to me is that there are definitely some advantages and some disadvantages of working in this virtual world. And, I talked about IBM and how they tried to launch this. I have my own personal experience from, I was working at Microsoft for many years, and I had a team of employees that we all worked in the office. And for years, they really were trying to push and request for the opportunity to work from home. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but there's kind of an old school thought and a more modern new school thought. And I was more of the old school thought, where I really wanted people to come into the office and work face to face. And we went round and round in these kind of back and forth arguments. And a lot of times their comment was that they can be more productive when they're working from home. And my argument was, well, there's certain productivity gains that you don't realize unless you're working face to face. And so, the point that I'm going to make here, this is really important. If you think about all of the advantages from being able to work remotely, there are some really powerful and impactful advantages that you can recognize. Kind of one little data point that I'll just share with you, just from a purely financial standpoint, both employers and employees recognize some big advantages from being able to work remotely. The statistics show that employers will save about $22,000 per year per employee that works remotely, and employees will save about $8,000 per year by working remotely. And the list that you see on your screen of the advantages and the pros, this is just a small list. I could easily add another 15 or 20 items to the list of advantages. So what's interesting, of course, is that with the advantages, there's also some disadvantages. And these, what you see on your screen right now is just a list of some of those disadvantages. I also could list probably another 15 or 20 disadvantages that go in here. So as you contemplate the pros versus the cons, whether it's better to work from the office or better to work from home, it really kind of brings up the question about which is better. And I'm curious, I am going to ask you to use the chat window really quick to share your opinion. And tell me, if you can just type into the chat window, whether you think it's better to work remotely or better to work from the office. So you can type in the chat window, either remote or office. And I'm just curious what your opinion is on that. Is it better to work from the office or better to work remote? So I thank you, Anna. I see your comment about working remote is better. See another comment, remote. I'll invite the rest of you that are yet to weigh in to still do that. My feedback as I now get ready to kind of turn the corner and start talking about how we can have this really strong presence and impact in the virtual world is to say, if you were to go out and do some research and some study on this to try to definitively decide or understand which is better, working from home or working remote, the answer to that question is it really depends. It really depends on a lot of different circumstances. So you can also, if you go out there and try to find some information on if it's good or bad, you'll find just this endless list of articles and information with different people with different points of view telling you that this way is better or that way is better. But for the most part, I'm going to focus the rest of our conversation on the assumption that you're working remotely and that you're going to continue to work remotely. And with that assumption, there are a number of strategies that I'm going to point out that you can deploy to really create a stronger presence and a stronger impact now that you're working remotely. I'm going to cover these 4 basic strategies that you see on your screen, and let's go ahead and just jump into that right now. So the first strategy that I'm going to talk about has to do with what I refer to as workspace strategy. So if you think about this for a minute, you know, when you were working in the office face-to-face with your peers, there was a work environment that you had. There was a workspace that you had, and that environment and that workspace was set up to help you focus on your work, to avoid distractions, and to be able to be productive. Well, now that you're working remotely, the requirement or the need for that environment hasn't diminished at all. You still need to have that dedicated workspace. Now, one thing that I am going to try to do here really quick is show you a video. It's actually a humorous video that illustrates this point. Give me just 1 second to see this up, and then hopefully by the time I'm done showing this video, it's only about 1 minute long. It illustrates the point on how important it is to have that dedicated workspace that you're working in. So I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint and I'm going to switch over to share a video clip here. It'll take me just 1 second, and you should be able to start see that now.
The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me. My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. North Korea, South Korea's policy choices on North.
Okay, let me switch back to my PowerPoint. Okay, I've seen that video now many times, and every time I see it, I find it to be very, very entertaining and amusing. It's something that if you've worked remotely for a while, you've probably experienced maybe in a much smaller form than was shown on that video, with regards to, you know, maybe people interrupting a conference call or a video call that you're on, or somebody walking through the camera. But really the point here that I want to focus on is just like when you're in the office and you have a dedicated space that's really focused on making you productive, it's really important to mimic that now that you're in your remote workspace. So you're going to hear a couple themes that I repeat with most of these strategies. One of those themes is to mimic, or do the best you can to mimic the environment or mimic the actual benefits that you had when you were working face to face. And then the other one's going to be communication, which we'll get to in just one second. I also want to offer some just suggestions on how you can do that. And these are pretty straightforward, but have the discussion with the people that are in your household so that they know the rules. Put up a sign if you need to so that people know the rules and when you're on a conference call. And then the last comment that I'll make on this is that if it's a really, really important meeting, consider if it's an opportunity, or if it's an option, I should say, if it's really important, consider coming into the office for that, just so that you can really avoid any distractions and focus on the importance of that. So the next point that I would make on the same or similar topic about your workspace, this is the second strategy, and of course it's a variation of the first one, which is to set up rules for yourself. There is a moment ago when we looked at about all those pros that you have from working from home. There are some really cool pros. I mean, you can wear your pajamas to work, and you can have a much more fluent schedule. But what research has shown over and over again is that just like when you were working in the office and you had a schedule that you'd adhere to, and you have a kind of a process and a rhythm that you adhere to, it's really important to establish that even though you're working remotely. Now, that's not to say that you can't throw away all the pros that come with working remotely, but you should be very aware of kind of this environment and set up rules for yourself as well as for others. And if I'm going to give you some recommendations on how to implement that, it's very straightforward. It mostly has to do with just showing up for work. That's not to say that there won't be a day or two you can take advantage of the remote opportunity, but showing up for work, creating a schedule, creating a plan, and we're going to talk more about it in a few minutes, but also taking advantage of the opportunity to be on video, attend meetings with your video camera. And of course, to do that, you need to be able to show up and be ready for the day, ready for work. All right, so if I'm going to now, most of the commentary that I have to share with you in the session today is really focused on these communication strategies. And what's really interesting around these communication strategies, you'll see here in just a minute, there's a little bit of overlap from one to the next, but if you kind of pay close attention as I go through these next two or three, even though there is a little bit of overlap, there is some very clear distinctions that I'm trying to call out. So first of all, this is the first one relative to having a visibility or a communication strategy. If you go online right now and try to search for visibility strategy, it's an actual term. And that visibility strategy is what I'm talking about here, which can also be referred to as a communication strategy. But think about when you're working in the office, face to face, at the water cooler, going to lunch, there's all these interactions that take place. There's just constant interactions with your peers. And now that you're working remotely, almost all of those spontaneous interactions, they're just gone. And so what research has shown, and what you probably have also experienced yourself, is that those spontaneous communication opportunities are valuable. They really add some important productivity to your workday that now that you're working remotely, it's just not there. So when you think about this kind of void, the first strategy is to speak up. Really make intentional efforts to over communicate. So if I kind of give you my, there's another slide I want to share really quick with you, which is to talk about some really powerful statistics regarding this lack of communication. And the research shows that organizations with connected employees show significant productivity increases. 97% of workers believe that communication impacts their tasks every day. And 28% of employees cite poor communication as a reason for not being able to deliver work on time. And then the last one, which is just interesting, is the financial implication. So miscommunication costs companies with 100 employees an average of $420,000 per year. So as you think about what you can do to start building your visibility strategy and your communication strategy, it really comes down to over communication. And like I said, mimicking the behavior that you would display in the office environment. Don't be afraid to reach out to your peers. When you're working remotely, you work in this bubble, and that as days go by, that bubble starts to become more and more and more of an isolation bubble. And it takes a real intent and a real deliberate effort not to fall prey to that bubble. So over communicate, reach out, set up a daily goal of having a certain number of communications with your peers or with your boss. Use the availability notification tools that most of you, I'm sure, are very aware of, that show whether you're available or you're busy, and be very deliberate in communicating with your peers. So in follow-up to that, the second strategy that I'm going to refer to just on this category of visibility strategy is to ask questions. You know, I'll share a quick story with you that helps, or hopefully will illustrate this point. So I talked about that isolation bubble. So when we start getting into that isolation bubble, the communication goes down, and when the communication goes down, you don't have the questions that you're asking that you normally would. So a number of years ago, I was in charge of this offsite for my entire organization. I wasn't solely responsible for it. I was put on a committee of about 8 people. There were 500 employees worldwide that were all going to get together for an offsite for 4 days. And I had been put on a committee to build the offsite, to determine where we were going to meet, to build the agenda, to bring in the speakers, and just do the whole thing. On our very, very first meeting that we had as a committee to build this offsite, it was very interesting, because the conversation during the first meeting, it quickly started to focus on where we were going to meet, the actual physical location. And a lot of these employees that were in this global world, they were very clear they had sent information to their representatives to make sure that whatever we did, that we met somewhere where the climate was warm. So we were talking about Florida or Southern California or Arizona. And it's funny, because for at least half of that very first meeting, that was the general topic, was where are we going to meet? Well, we concluded the first meeting. We were meeting every week. We came back the second week, and one of the 8 individuals on that committee that was in charge of building the offsite was actually an executive assistant. And when we launched the second meeting, it was interesting. They said, so everybody, I'm really happy to announce that for our meeting today, we actually have one of our senior VPs joining us to give us some of their feedback and some of their direction on how we want to do this offsite. But before I turn the time over to them, I want to give you all some great news. I spent the last week doing some research on possible venues and locations for this offsite, and I found a fantastic venue with a fantastic discount in Phoenix, Arizona. So I'm really happy to announce that we've already finalized the location as Phoenix, Arizona. We've made our down payment, and we're all going to Phoenix. So I thought you'd all want to hear that based on our conversation last week, and now I'm going to turn the time over to our senior VP to share their thoughts. And so we all turned to the senior VP, and the first thing they said is, well, I don't really want to rain on your parade, but I do have to tell you that I have a requirement. And that requirement is that we have this offsite at one of the 4 main offices that exists, and that's going to help us reduce our travel expenses, because by having this event at one of the 4 main offices, a big portion of employees will already be there and they won't have to travel. Well, it turned out that this reservation and down payment was non-refundable, and it turned out to be quite a big ordeal. And this assistant who kind of went ahead and made the reservations, they suffered significantly by having made that hasty decision. And so if I bring you back to the comment that I'm making right now, the strategy that I'm talking about right now around asking questions, the point is, if we had been working in our normal environment, that would never have happened, because that assistant would have got up, walked across the aisle, talked with one of their colleagues, talked with their boss, and had asked questions about this. But because they were in that isolated communication bubble, they just felt like they should, or compelled to just go ahead and do it. And so I'm sure that some of you have had experiences in your career where you've worked on something and delivered it, and then your boss says, well, that's not really what I was looking for. That potential becomes increasingly realistic when you're working in this remote environment. So please just speak up, ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And you can see on your screen here, I'm offering some advice, again, to mimic the behavior that you would normally have in the face-to-face environment and to establish these regular communication rhythms. All right, so moving on to the next communication strategy, it has to do a lot with email. And what's interesting to me on this is that, you know, again, this isolation bubble, it moves us into this area where we are communicating mostly through email. And I want to call out, when you think about your presence, and that's kind of the title of this session that we're talking about today, is creating presence in this virtual world. When you isolate and move to that world of email only, you don't have much of a presence. And so the point here is to use your voice. You have to get to a point where you use your voice, and you have to be deliberate about that. You have to really force yourself, and that's the theme. I know that I've repeated myself on this, but you know, mimicking the face-to-face work environment and being deliberate. You have to force yourself to do these things because they don't just happen naturally. So create an environment where you're standing up, getting away from email, standing up, walking away, using your cell phone, using your phone to talk with people with your voice. Okay. Two more strategies relative to the actual visibility or communication strategy. And this next one has to do with basically being involved and volunteering for things. You know, this, in addition to creating this isolation bubble, it also creates this blind spot to what you're actually doing. And I'm going to pause for just a moment on this because this one is really interesting. This one, there's been so much research that has been done that shows how when you work remotely, especially when you're on a team, that there is a huge opportunity for conflict and for a toxic work environment to come into play, where when you were working face to face, you were harmonious, you were happy, you were productive as a team. And now what's happening is that you don't see your peer coming into the office and sitting down at their desk and working for 8 hours. You don't see them working on projects and calling customers. You just don't see them. And so this kind of toxic environments can start to develop where you start to feel like you're the only one doing any work and your peers aren't holding up their end of the bargain. So the focus that I want to put on this is to really look at yourself, and ask yourself the question, am I visible? Do people know that I'm working? Do people know the work that I'm doing? And one of the strategies that you can deploy to make sure that people do see you that way is to volunteer and to be really active in reaching out and offering to help your peers in, you know, much more specific and deliberate than you had done in the past. And so again, you're seeing some themes come through each of these visibility strategies, but be very focused on volunteering and being visible. This last comment, which I'm going to make, this is relative to strategy number 5, and I've already mentioned it to an extent, but it's use your video. You think about when you talk with somebody face to face, or when you just talk with somebody on the phone, you think about how much information is conveyed when you're having that visual voice communication, and how much isn't conveyed when you're not able to see the individual. So I can't stress enough to really create impact and presence in this virtual world. Take advantage of these tools that you have to be visible. And so the advice here is use your video camera, use your video camera, use your video camera. You really need to work on resisting the temptation to attend meetings with your voice only. And so a lot of times when I present this subject, especially with a number of the most recent times I've represented this, and it's probably because we're now about a year into this pandemic world where we're a year now working from home, I get a lot of people that will kind of push back on this point, and they'll start to question me, and they'll say, well, you know, one of the advantages from working from home is that I can attend meetings in my pajamas, and I can have a lot of really corners that I cut. And so my advice to them is, you know, pick a day a week where that you indulge and you allow yourself to do that. But for the most part, show up, use your video camera so people can see you. It's incredibly important to create that presence and over time, I talked about that toxic work environment. This is also a way to really address that toxic work environment, because when you show up to a meeting and you're on the video and people can see you, that you're there and you're dressed for the day and you're dressed like you're ready to do work, it really helps avoid that toxic work environment and really kind of promotes you and helps you establish that presence. Also, I would just mention really quick, if you don't have a really good internet connection, or if you don't have a really good microphone, or you don't have a good camera, invest in that as well. I can't tell you how many times in the last year I've attended meetings where one of my colleagues is trying to attend these meetings with a horrible microphone, and you can't understand what they're saying, and it's really distracting. So make an investment in the technology to be able to do that effectively. Okay, so that's it for the visibility and communication strategies. And so now what I want to do is just take a moment and talk about the third area of focus, which has to do with what I call your productivity strategy. So I'm going to ask you to use your chat window here in just a second. I want you to think about this for a moment. I want you to think, you actually should see a question on your screen. And the question is basically true or false. Employees that work remotely have more tendency to let their home life bleed into their work life, as opposed to letting their work life bleed into their home life. So that's a little bit of a tricky question, but I want you to use the chat window to type true or false, whether you think that statement is true or false. And again, that statement is, employees that work remotely have more tendency to let their home life bleed into their work life, as opposed to letting their work life bleed into their home life. I'd be very interested to know your opinion on that, if you think that is a true or a false statement. I'm going to wait for just one moment to ask you that. Go ahead and type that into the chat window. Question is a little bit misleading, but all right. I do see one response saying true. So here's the deal, and there's been a lot of research that's been done on this as well. One of the problems that you run into when you are working from home is that you have this hard time unplugging from work. And so even though this kind of can swing both ways, for the most part, the problem that people run into is they don't unplug, and they find that they're letting their work life bleed way too much into their home life. And it's just because you're constantly on, your office, your workspace is right there. Your phone is always in your hand. It's so hard to unplug. And so the point that I'm trying to make here with this strategy, it probably, at least at first glance, might come across as the opposite of what you'd expect me to be saying. You've all heard of work-life balance before. It's really, really important to create a really strong work-life balance. But the risk, the primary risk when you're working remotely is that your work life starts to take over. And so you have to be able to be really clear and deliberate about creating that distinction between your work life and your home life. So we talked before about creating a schedule. Create that schedule and then stick to it. And when you're done for the day, or when you leave the office, when you leave your home office, you leave the office. If you were working from a physical office and you left the office at 6 p.m., you got in your car and you're ready to drive home, and you're on your drive home, nobody's going to stop and turn around and drive back to the office just to do a few more things. So make that distinction and create that schedule and adhere to that schedule. Of course, there's always exceptions, and there's always some emergency that we might have to deal with from time to time, and you can, handle those as you need to, but really be careful that one or the other doesn't bleed into each other, and create that really strong positive balance. Okay, the other productivity strategy that I want to talk about for just a moment is what I refer to as being available and being present. And I know I spoke about this briefly a minute ago, but I want to share with you just one more thought on this. The remote work often gets that stigma that you're not doing a full day's work. People can't see you. They don't really know what you're doing as they did when they saw you in the office, and it creates this out of sight, out of mind. And so the real point I'm going to make here with this strategy, and this might seem a little bit strange, but I really strongly recommend that you create a behavior in your day-to-day work environment where you establish your presence to your boss and to your peers to avoid that out of sight, out of mind trap. And it's really not difficult to do, but throughout the day, maybe once at the beginning of the day, once in the middle of the day, and once at the end of the day, have that touch point with your boss and with your peers so that they see you, they know you're there, they know you're visible, they know you're present. And of course, in quick succession to that is to make sure that if your peers or your boss reach out to you, that you're available and you reply very promptly. The same concept being, if you're in the office and your peer walks over to you, you're there immediately. That is the behavior that you kind of need to mimic. And of course, if you're busy, you can tell them you're busy, but make sure you get back to them that day as quickly as you can. So that is the second productivity strategy. I do want to spend just a minute talking about what I refer to as management strategies. And a lot of times when I present this information, I'll get people that ask me the question, I'm not a manager, so why are you talking about a management strategy? Well, even though you might not be a manager, you have a manager and you have a work team. And so I think these 2 points that I'm going to bring up with regards to management strategy, I bring up from the standpoint that if you don't have these in your work environment, that you should bring them to the attention of your manager and really ask them to focus on and implement something that will help you as a team. And so this first management strategy that I talk about is encouraging informal conversation. Again, when you were in the office working, you would have all of those informal conversations, either at the water cooler or at lunchtime or across the aisle from one cubicle to another. Didn't really have to focus on work. They were just kind of informal, casual conversation. And the point is that those were important. Those are important. And the opportunity for those just almost completely disappears when you work virtually. And so you have to be deliberate and intentional about creating that environment. So when it comes to the manager, the advice and the direction that I give the manager is that they have to do just that, create those opportunities where your team can have those casual conversations. You as a manager can reach out throughout the day. When I was working in the office as a manager, every day I would walk up and down the aisle and talk with each one of the people on my team, if maybe just for a minute or two. How's your day going? How are things going? What's going on? Do that in the virtual workplace. And then one additional word of advice, a lot of times when you work remotely and you get together on a conference call, say it's your weekly team call, you so quickly just jump into the agenda, you quickly jump into what is business oriented. Spend a couple minutes at the beginning of that call just focusing on more of a casual conversation. And there's a laundry list of really cool topics that you can start a meeting off with, like, have everybody go around the room and just share what is your favorite book of all time. You can go around the room and have everybody answer the question, if you could learn a new skill, what would it be? Or if you could have anybody over for dinner, who would it be? Just some really simple things that you can do to facilitate that casual water cooler conversation. The second strategy relative to management is one around what I refer to as team bonding. I've had the privilege or the opportunity in my career as a manager to about once a year, maybe twice a year, get the team together, go do something offsite, go do something fun together. I don't know that everybody always has those opportunities, but of course, now that you're working remotely, that takes on a whole new flavor. And so when you need to find the opportunity as a work team to get together, and even though you're working remotely, you can still do that. So for example, these are some of the things that I would strongly recommend if you're not doing it, that you would bring up with your manager and say, hey, let's try this. I think it would help build our team composition and camaraderie. So, you can still have lunch as a team. It might be remote, but you can still do it. And then one of the things about having that lunch or that team meeting is you can add elements of fun to that, like have a show and tell meeting where everybody brings their pet and introduces the rest of their team to their pet, or bring your children, or bring a guest speaker. You can do things like going to workshops together, attending or having a guest speaker come talk to you, having a Netflix party. There's all sorts of creative things that you can do to kind of create that cohesiveness as a team. And if you're not doing that, bring that up to your manager and ask them to do that, or for the opportunity to do that. Now, I'll just make one last comment before I move on to some of the rest of the comments for this session, and that is, you know, so much of this has to do with, like I say, mimicking the communication and mimicking the environment. And the reason that there's so much focus on that is that there's power behind that, and there's a reason why all that exists. And so it's just not going to happen spontaneously like it used to. So you have to force yourself to get into that mode and to do those things. All right, so if you actually had the opportunity in the last 3 weeks to attend these sessions, you would have attended a session that was focused on talk like a leader, think like a leader, and then also building your personal brand. And what I wanted to do is just for a moment kind of reflect on a couple things that are almost a bit of a kind of a refresher on those 2 points, but it's a refresher with a very important point to make. And that is, I think I mentioned at the beginning of this session, a lot of the rules that used to apply to these 2 topics are now changing, that we live in a remote world. So if you look on your screen, what you're seeing is a list of leadership attributes. These are attributes that, as we get into detail in the executive presence course, these are the historical attributes divided into different levels of importance and impact. And what's really interesting here is I want to show you a follow-up screen, which shows you a little bit about how some of these attributes and the importance of these attributes are changing. We have new attributes that are showing up on the list for the first time. We have attributes that are being removed from the list that aren't nearly as important as they used to be. And then we have some that are increasing in importance that have been there in the past as well. So I'm going to talk about that for just a moment. And the theme relative to executive presence or leadership presence is that kind of that focus on historical attributes like decisiveness and passion and pedigree and showing teeth. Those are greatly being diminished in the virtual world. And what you see, some of the new and emerging attributes that are really becoming really important, is basically these attributes that are having to do with help and assistance and being able to be a team player and a team worker. I'll give you a quick story as a quick example. So just a few weeks ago, we were having a meeting, and a company meeting that was talking about, you know, we reached the new January 1st of the new year. We were talking about some new benefits that were being rolled out to all of the company employees. And as we were having this conversation, having kind of just hit my 1 year mark at this employer, I had some questions that were kind of specific to me, because the other people that were in that meeting had been at the company for more than a year, but this was my 1 year anniversary, and I had some questions that I was asking that didn't necessarily apply to everybody that was on the call. And so the person that was conducting the call was polite in saying, you know what, Ben, let's take that offline, so we don't, you know, because that question is specific to you. So let's take this offline, and I'll get back to my talking points for this session. And that was fine. I do that all the time. And so I said, fine. And so then we ended the call. And about 5 minutes after the call was over, not the person that was giving the session, but my boss called me and said, hey, I know you asked these questions in the session we just completed. Here's the link to the websites, and here are the actual answers to the questions you're asking. I hope this helps. Now, you know, you think about the subject of executive presence and how executive presence applies to this new virtual world that we live in. The impact that had on my boss and their ability and willingness to reach out to me in this virtual world was dramatic. It was a small thing, but yet it was a very dramatic gesture, and it had a very big impact on how I saw their leadership presence and their executive presence. And so that's the concept. And it doesn't have to be just with your boss. It can be with your peers as well. And reaching out and showing that element of teamwork and camaraderie and assistance is incredibly important. So you also see this, there's an increase on some of the traditional attributes. And I've already called this out for just a minute ago, talking about appearance and listening and empathy. Those are some historical important ones that are now even more important as we all isolate into these bubbles and we see this big wall built between the historical communication opportunities. It's so important to be able to have that appearance and to listen and to show empathy. So we're coming down the home stretch here. There's a couple more comments that I want to make. Those were some of the ways the rules are changing with regards to leadership, executive presence. I want to talk for a minute about building your personal brand. Now, we did a session just a couple weeks ago, or last week, I should say. I think it's 2 weeks ago, on building your personal brand. And there's a little bit of a repeat on this as well, but I want to really try to make this point because I think it's so important, which is how are you seen? How do people see you? So I'm going to show another video clip here really quick. Give me just a moment to tee this up. And this video clip, it's only about a minute in length. I'm going to have to stop sharing my desktop and I'll share this video clip. So give me 1 second as I make that transition. The comment or the point that I'm making here as we shift to this, and I ask you, how do other people see you? Think about the answer to that question in this virtual world. How do people see you? So much of what we do is really focused on attending calls over the phone. And this video gives some insight into how to answer that question about how do other people see you. So now I'm switching over to that right now. You should see it momentarily. Oh, I apologize. I just shared the wrong screen. Give me 1 more second here. Okay, you should be able to see that now.
Hey, Paul. Thanks for being here on time. Paul? Hey, Paul, can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Hey guys.
Hey, Tyler.
Sorry I'm late. Having a hard time connecting.
1 second. Paul's having a sound issue.
I can't hear you. Try adjusting your output settings.
Can you hear me?
It's the gear icon.
Tyler, are you on hotel Wi-Fi?
Yeah, what?
Never mind, I got it. I just had to change a few settings.
Great. Maybe we can get started then. Oh, great.
I think your mic is picking up your speakers.
My mic?
Hey, Beth.
Hey everyone, sorry I'm late. I had to download a new version of the platform.
You should plan extra time for the updates. There's pretty much one every time.
Sounds like someone just joined.
Hey guys, it's John. I had to call in. I'm stuck in traffic. Have I missed anything yet?
No, it would have been nice for you to join the rest of us, but we'll see you when you get home. All right, while everyone is here, finally, Tyler, do you have that financial report?
Well, it's been the last few weeks updating our books, and I got some great news for you. Schedule from this point last year. We had a great Q1.
We lost Tyler, I think.
Am I frozen?
Hey, Trip, I think we lost Tyler.
Yeah, I know, we lost Tyler.
Hey guys, it sounded like Tyler was cutting out.
We know, John. All right, while we wait on Tyler, why don't we go over all of the reports from Beth, are you with us?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, everyone, I know some of you have to leave soon, but I just wanted to go over a couple of the queries before. Okay, excuse me. My wife's out of town this week. Daddy's, I'm so sorry. Okay, you just spilt grape juice on the carpet. Daddy is in a meeting.
All right, I'm going to bring you back to my PowerPoint here. And as I'm doing that, one thing that I would just mention, it's really interesting to me. Every single scenario that was just highlighted in that video clip, I have experienced just within the last couple of months. I routinely have conference calls that I attend where I have peers where there is so much background noise you can barely understand what they're saying. I routinely have peers who have sound effects as part of their PC when they switch to a different slide or when they have incoming email, and you'll hear all these crazy sound effects going off in the background. I have peers that have bad connection. I have witnessed and experienced these things all the time, and I think you have too, which makes this video clip as amusing as it is. And I just ask you for a moment to, again, do people see you the way that you want to be seen? Because the whole topic of the session today is creating impact and presence in the virtual world. And the way that you show up relative to these video calls is incredibly impactful. And it does make an impression on people, and it does create an impact for the good or for the bad. And so I bring that up kind of in conclusion, just so that you'll be very, very aware of that and focus on that if you need to. So that wraps things up for today. I will, as usual, just make a couple last comments. If you have additional questions that we didn't get a chance to go over in today's session, I would invite you to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to respond and have a conversation with you. And that being said, again, thank you for the opportunity today, and I'm going to turn the time back over to Kale.
Thank you, Ben. I hope my Wi-Fi is good.
I was going to talk to you about that later, but no, it's good.
So thank you so much for the presentation. I'm not sure if, oh my gosh, I need to remember this all the time. Pessoal, mudando agora para português. As I always forget to switch back. Então, pessoal, eu queria agradecer o Benjamin pela facilitação, e eu convido vocês também, se vocês estão aqui é porque vocês já fazem parte da comunidade do Reactor, mas para quem estiver assistindo a gravação desse encontro, existe uma comunidade aqui no Brasil, se chama Reactor São Paulo. Lá vocês podem conhecer mais a nossa comunidade, os nossos encontros, novas tecnologias e desenvolver novas habilidades. Devido à pandemia, a gente está fazendo esses eventos muito no formato online, mas assim que for possível, a gente vai voltar a ter os nossos encontros presenciais aqui em São Paulo. Mas se vocês ainda não fazem parte, convido vocês a conferirem a nossa comunidade. Eu não sei se alguém tem alguma pergunta ou comentário para fazer para o Benjamin. Se alguém tiver algo a dizer, por favor, sinta-se à vontade, pode ser em inglês ou em português. Eu estou aqui para ajudar vocês. E antes, enquanto vocês estão digitando, ou se alguém for digitar algo, eu convido vocês também a participarem da nossa pesquisa de satisfação. Todo evento a gente compartilha essa pesquisa. Se vocês puderem dedicar 1 ou 2 minutos para responderem, essa pesquisa seria incrível. Nos ajudaria bastante a melhorar o evento como um todo, e até mesmo para o Benjamin saber se está tudo certo com o conteúdo que ele está facilitando. Eu estou compartilhando com vocês aqui o link dessa pesquisa também, se vocês quiserem acessar. O link é ak.ms/reactor-pesquisa. Logo quando vocês acessarem, o formulário vai perguntar o código do evento que você está assistindo. O evento desse evento em particular é 12909. E eu estou vendo que a Érica e Sueli estão digitando. Eu vou aguardar só mais um minutinho. Ok. I'm just giving a moment to see if someone is going to.
Sure. There's a couple comments on there just saying thank you and that the content was great. So thank you for those. I appreciate the feedback. Very appreciated.
Really like the videos though. Could see myself. I just don't have any kid, neither a pet, but thinking in adopt one.
Well, you'll need to have one of those when we do the team lunch and you get to introduce your pet to all of your peers.
I have some paintings, which is kind of new, but you cannot see it.
That'll do as well.
All right, so I'm not sure if Erica is still typing or if it's a lag in the typing. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she has a child and a dog. Yeah, dogs are fun. I don't know if you're a cat person or a dog person.
A little bit of both.
Yeah. Won't take you. Yeah. Thank you. Obrigado, Érica, por fazer parte e por estar aqui com a gente. E eu acho que eu vou encerrando o evento por aqui, pessoal. Tudo bem? Benjamin, thank you so much for being with us today. And yeah, I guess everybody's saying thank you too. So see you next week, right?
Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
All right. Bye, everybody. Tchau, tchau, pessoal. Até a próxima.